What is the price of sports washing the World Cup in Qatar? The human cost, migrant workers, the daily lives of women and LGBTQ people, and the crazy sums of money thrown at trying to make Qatar look progressive, not only to benefit its rulers, but also the West in justifying their business ties. Qatar's ruling emir spoke of celebrating diversity as the premier men's football event kicked off, while officials seized a Brazilian journalist's home state flag, which happens to feature a rainbow. Then, FIFA banned the One Love armbands captains were planning on wearing in protest of Qatar's laws against same-sex relationships. Instead, Germany's players covered their mouths for the team photo. They received praise from German Chancellor Olaf Scholz. He said he was happy to see them send a clear signal in favour of an open society. Iran's squad refused to sing their anthem before their opening match at least, possibly risking their lives back home where protests rage over the death of a young woman detained by the morality police. Iranian state TV cut away from its live broadcast. So divisive and so expensive. There's never been a World Cup like this. I'm Ben Fajzullin in Berlin with your DW Business Special. Joining me to crunch the numbers and discuss the knock-on effects is David Conn, investigations correspondent at the British newspaper The Guardian. He wrote a book about corruption at FIFA, football's world governing body. David, just first off, is there still corruption at FIFA?
Well, it's very hard to know for sure, because the nature of corruption is obviously that it happens behind closed doors. But I think we do have to acknowledge that the corruption scandals led to many of the people at FIFA being arrested or banned from football, and it is largely a new broom at FIFA, and they have brought in more modern corporate cultures to try to address the corruption issues. And I think the general assumption is that it's much less of a significant feature than it was before the arrests in 2015.
Well, the corruption aside, Qatar's World Cup is the most expensive edition of the tournament. We'll look at the figures later. First, the human costs. Rights groups say thousands of workers may have died on the huge construction sites. The government calls the claims outrageous and offensive. It's threatened to sue. Let's clear up that issue, first of all, with David, because a lot of people are calling this the world's deadliest major sporting event in history.
Yeah, and I think it can become quite distasteful and uncomfortable for there to be so many arguments about the figures for deaths, for people dying. But it has come to that. Now, a lot of people cite an article that was written in The Guardian that has a figure of 6,500 migrant workers dying. But that article seems to have created the impression in people's minds that that was 6,500 people dying in the construction of World Cup stadiums. But the article never said that. It said that it was 6,500 migrant workers from 5 different South Asian countries who had died in Qatar in I think the 10 years since the World Cup was awarded, in all different occupations, and not related, many of them, I think most of them, to construction. And not directly related to World Cup construction, in which the figures in that article are that there were 37 workers who died in the construction, who worked on the construction of stadiums, of which 3 were accidents in the construction, one of whom was a British construction worker, and 37 have died in what they call non-work related deaths. But this is the big issue for human rights groups, not necessarily related to World Cup construction, is just the heat and the stress of the working conditions in the Gulf, in that part of the world, not just in Qatar. And the countries have been built by the labour of workers brought in from very, very poor countries, mainly in South Asia. So the human rights groups issue is that not enough is done to protect people from the heat, from the suffocating heat that in many of the months in the year, it's really very, very oppressive heat. And you do have to be very careful of people's health when they're working there.
So the broader issue of worker treatment, what can't be argued is this is the most expensive edition by far. The price tag is an unparalleled $220 billion. Just look at the huge gap here. Previously, the most pricey World Cups were Brazil 2014 and Russia 2018, which cost less than $15 billion. Germany's 2006 Cup cost just over $4 billion. One of the world's wealthiest countries, this is what Qatar spent building 7 new stadiums and rebuilding another, along with an entire metro network. It forked out even more on skyscrapers, hotels, highways, universities, museums, and a port. The country's been transformed, literally, from the outside, at least. David, could that massive investment backfire on the emirate, considering all the controversy it's kicked off?
Yeah, I think, again, they would argue that a lot of that spending is infrastructure spending. As you say, they've built a new port, they've built a metro system, they've built other, as you say, hotels, and a lot of infrastructure. So they would say that that's general building of the country. Perhaps it's been accelerated by the fact that the World Cup was happening. But where I think there's no doubt at all is that they just weren't equipped, like a country such as Germany, to host a World Cup in the sense of having stadiums. They only had one stadium, and even that had to be quite substantially refurbished or reconfigured. And then they've built 7, as we're seeing on our television screens, superb, brand new modern stadiums. And it's very, very hard to see any sort of after use, any sort of legacy for those stadiums in Qatar, which is such a small country. There were some promises when they bid for the World Cup, when they got the vote in 2010, that they were going to dismantle some of the stadiums and build them in other countries that could need them. But I don't actually think we know what is going to happen to the stadiums. But I think on the wider implication of your question, will it backfire because of the controversy? It's very, very interesting to see now that the tournament has started, the action starts, the fans are in the stadiums, the broadcasters are all there, the stadiums look fantastic, all lit up, broadcast around the world. I think this is what they've been building up to. This is what they've spent the money for. This is what they've survived and sustained all the controversy for, because they want to be able to project these images of this is the country that has brought all these people together over an incredible event that people love around the world, the World Cup, and they've come to Qatar and they want to show that they've organised it really well, that the stadiums are incredible, and this is part of their national projection, their strategy for projecting their country around the world.
And its Western allies are also keen on putting a positive spin on this World Cup because of their relations with Qatar. They're strengthening their alliances right now to cover their energy needs amid the crunch created by Russia. What do you think about how Western nations are responding to this World Cup?
I think that's a very good question, and I think that that does lead us into this tangled, contradictory attitude that there is to it. So I think in the commentary, there is so much criticism of Qatar, of its treatment of the migrant workers, and quite rightly, the human rights groups have absolutely campaigned for better conditions against elements of the working practices that are abusive. But at the same time, and also LGBTQ plus rights and so on, and other issues of free speech. Obviously, Qatar isn't a democracy just like the other countries in the Gulf. But at the same time, at exactly the same time, these countries are huge investors in Europe. I mean, they're huge investors in the UK. Obviously, one of the ruling family of Abu Dhabi owns Manchester City Football Club. A Saudi Arabian sovereign wealth fund owns Newcastle United Football Club now. They own huge real estate in London and elsewhere in the UK. And Qatar itself has signed a £10 billion investment deal, I think this year or last year, and the British government is continually looking to the Gulf for investment, particularly post-Brexit. So I think the Qataris at times find themselves a bit baffled by quite how much Western and European governments are falling over themselves to ingratiate themselves with their country, while at the same time there's so much media criticism of the country itself and conditions within it.
And then there's a big commercial aspect that's involved. One of the major sponsors of Germany's World Cup squad in Qatar has ended its partnership with the German Football Association. Major German supermarket chain Rewe says it made the decision because the DFB capitulated to FIFA's threats to punish teams wearing the One Love armband in protest against Qatar's laws against homosexuality. Captains of several European teams had planned to wear it but backed down. David, how dire is it when sponsors start pulling out?
Yeah, I mean, it's very rare that sponsors pull out, and, you know, sponsors put up with an awful lot. Sponsors are concerned with their own brand image, and they get huge brand exposure and benefit from associating themselves with football. And I think usually a criticism can go the other way, which is that football is used to launder the images of the sponsors, rather than that the sponsors are concerned that their image is going to be sullied by its association with football. I think the armband and the rainbow flags, yeah, these are really unfortunate, upsetting things that have happened, because we can all see that the armband and the rainbow, that it's there to show solidarity with LGBTQ plus people, but also human freedom, the freedom to express yourself. It's a bit of a perennial issue, because FIFA takes the position, and it's not alone as a governing body of football and of sport, that it tries to keep what it considers to be politics. And I know you could argue that that is not a political gesture at all. I'm not really defending what FIFA have said. I'm just trying to explain that I think that the background to this, and it's a very, very long-standing position, is that if they start to allow the actual game itself on the pitch to be used for political gesture, political demonstration, then where would it end? And some of the causes that some people or some players or some teams might want to espouse might be causes that we would find actually repugnant. So they try to keep it as a neutral space. And we've had examples in British football where players have wanted to show solidarity with different causes that most people would absolutely support, and they've been disciplined for it. But it's always really unattractive when it happens.
What about when the hordes of fans who are expected don't turn up or turn on their tellies? I know a lot of people boycotting the event. Germany's World Cup winner Philipp Lahm said he wouldn't go.
Well, I just don't feel that that's been a widespread reaction at all. Obviously, there's not a single team that has boycotted, and that's when it really has an impact. And I think that the figures are that 97% of the seats are full and 97% of the tickets have been bought. So for all the controversies and for all the criticism, the whole point of why Qatar and other countries want to host a World Cup is precisely because it is such a loved and special event that it would take something absolutely huge and obviously bigger than the criticism that has been of Qatar for a boycott to happen and for supporters in large numbers not to want to be there. And I think that the perspective that I feel we should put on this as well is that the World Cup, the last World Cup, was held in Russia in 2018. Vladimir Putin had already shown his true colours. He'd already annexed Crimea. He'd already been oppressive in the Donbass. I think the world already knew exactly who he was. And yet there really wasn't anywhere near as much controversy there. It didn't face as many accusations of sports washing as this has. But I think when we look back now and see how much it puffed up Vladimir Putin, and just 4 years later, he's waging this horrific war against his neighbour Ukraine, I think we can see that that was a massive sports washing event, and not just to boost the image of a country, but of, a ruler of a country who really does have murderous intent towards his neighbours.
David, apart from sports washing, this World Cup was billed as environmentally sustainable despite having to air condition the stadiums. I know a lot of high tech and low energy solutions were found, but this was also meant to be a compact event. The stadiums aren't too far apart, but tens of thousands of foreign fans are using shuttle flights between Dubai and Doha due to a lack of accommodation, high hotel prices and alcohol limits. How would you judge the greenwashing going on?
Maybe I'm going to give a surprising answer that might seem a bit tame, but I just think that that's a symptom of the world at large not grappling with the climate crisis. It is hard for me to single out this event. I mean, every mega event, was the Olympics in London in 2012, was that environmentally friendly, or did it involve a lot of travel and construction that wasn't really necessary? Is the world just carrying on hosting events? Do we, all of us, not want to give up our way of life that was forged in a time when climate crisis wasn't as much of an issue? So, look, it's not at all surprising, is it, that the hosting of a World Cup is not the most environmentally friendly activity that we could be involved with. And, I think any real promises to the contrary were never really going to be, fully realised.
Well, it'd be nice to see future World Cups perhaps make more of an effort. But David, let me also bring up something you brought up earlier. What happens once the World Cup is over? Are these wise investments? Sports tournaments are notorious for creating white elephants. Dan Plumley specialises in sports finance, and he points out that other more established footballing nations than Qatar had that problem too.
Issues with Brazil and South Africa. So it is a risk, and it's always a risk with any major sporting event. I think some of the things that Qatar have tried to do are trying to be a little bit innovative. So that, there's a stadium that's built from shipping containers that can be taken down and then reconstructed elsewhere. But you always run the risk with a major sporting tournament that your stadiums are left unused when everyone's gone home. And I think that will still be a risk for Qatar, especially given that their domestic league system is not as advanced as other countries yet. So, yeah, it will be a problem, but it's a problem with every sporting event as well.
So lastly, David, once the big event is over, what sort of country will the people of Qatar be left with, do you think?
Well, Qatar won the right to host the World Cup in 2010, 12 years ago. So we've all had a lot of time to think about what is this really for and what are they really after. And I think talking to people and covering it myself, I've come to the view that for this country, hosting the World Cup is part of a project for national projection, the building of the country itself on the global stage. And I think, and it's a very small country, population-wise, that's run by an emir, a ruler. And I think that the emir's legacy that he is looking for is for Qatar to be much better known on the world stage and to have hosted an event that's brought people together successfully. And he has been prepared, or they have been prepared, to sustain all the criticism and all the expense. And they're clearly prepared to sustain a number of stadiums that we cannot see how they can have any real after use. So I don't think it's that kind of legacy in the normal way that in Britain or in Germany, people would be very, very critical of white elephants, of stadiums that didn't have an after use. I think that that's built into the budget. And what the budget is paying for is the projection of Qatar on the world stage.
We're going into extra time, David, so we'll have to leave it there. Investigations correspondent at The Guardian, David Conn, thanks for pitching in. And from DW Business, I'm Ben Fajzullin. Whether or not you're watching this World Cup, do take care. Bye-bye.